President counted on him. Lawmakers courted him. Among Washington's power brokers, he was right up there at the top. But now he may face up to 15 years in jail. It's the story of Michael Deaver, once one of Ronald and Nancy Reagan's most trusted advisors. He left the White House in 1985, opened his own public relations firm, but soon after, there were accusations of influence peddling. Last December, an investigation by a special prosecutor resulted in Michael Deaver's conviction for perjury. And Barbara, he was supposed to have been sentenced sometime this month.
Yes, that's true. But an appeals court in Washington just ruled that the special prosecutor is unconstitutional. And Deaver's fate is now uncertain. It's up to the courts. But somehow, amidst all of this, he has written a book which includes the intimacies about his years with the Reagans. It's titled Behind the Scenes. It's out next week. And tonight is Michael Deaver's first television interview since his trial and conviction. If ever there was a Washington story of power and influence, downfall and defeat, it is the case of Michael Deaver, a man who had more influence with the President of the United States than almost any other person. For 20 years, he was an aide to the President. He was also Nancy Reagan's closest friend in the White House. Deaver's strong point wasn't domestic policy and only rarely foreign policy. He was the guy who made sure the President always looked good. He was the king of the photo opportunity. The man who made sure that the great communicator was getting the message across. You write in your book, I will not apologize for being preoccupied with television. There is simply no way to exaggerate the influence of that medium on political life. Why is it so important? In the case of Ronald Reagan, why wouldn't it have just been enough to have been a good president? Why did he need an image maker like yourself?
Well, I'm not sure I ever thought of myself as an image maker, but it's a game, Barbara. And,
what's a game?
The game that politicians and office holders play daily with the media. And my goal, you want to call it that, for the whole time I was in the White House with Ronald Reagan, was to stay ahead of them, was to beat them at their own game.
It was a game he rarely lost. If Ronald Reagan stood boldly in the Korean DMZ, it was Michael Deaver who set it up. If Ronald Reagan spoke movingly on the D-Day beaches of Normandy, it was Michael Deaver who picked the spot. So it isn't enough just to be a good president. You have to look like a good president.
Well, I think looking, obviously, and appearance is very important, but it's also staging, how you stage the message.
The image Deaver sought to show others was somewhat different from the one he saw of the Reagans while working with them inside the White House. I want to talk to you about some of the things that you write about both the President and Mrs. Reagan and the picture that it gives. Inauguration day, 9 o'clock in the morning, you have to wake the President up. It's 2 hours before he's supposed to be out there in the stand, and he's still sleeping and says, "Must I get out of bed?" Now, it's nice to be relaxed. Isn't that a bit much?
I thought it was terrific. I thought it was very refreshing. And here was a guy who was not consumed about the fact that he'd been elected president. He really was saying, gosh, can I have 10 more minutes, then I'll get up and do my duty.
You've been working since 6 in the morning, you say. You have a full agenda. There's an awful lot you want to talk to. You go into the President, and he's sitting there trying to teach his dog Lucky obedience. Mr. President, you say, there are many things we have to talk about. He's saying, here, Lucky, here, Lucky.
Yes.
Yes. You know, one would think the President should say, well, yes, Mike, what's in the scorecard?
Well, but wait a minute. This is his house. He doesn't, it isn't the factory or the office where he drives across town or commutes and goes to work. He walks downstairs. His dog followed him in.
Wasn't this during office hours?
Sure, sure.
But
what are office hours to the President of the United States?
Well, you just have this picture. Here you are coming in with important news, and he's teaching the dog.
I thought it was terrific.
Okay. The President, you say, never looks at the front page of the newspaper until after he's looked at the comic page. That's terrific.
I think it's a very healthy outlook for a president to have. Once again, it goes back to humor.
What's the best thing about the President? What's the worst?
Well, I think he is the most gentle man I've ever met. He is kind to a fault, and maybe that is also his worst quality. He believes and trusts people. He simply takes people for what they are and what they appear to him to be and believes the best about them. And in this world, and in this town particularly, that may not be a strength.
In short, even Mike Deaver's harshest criticism about the president comes out a compliment. His portrait of Nancy Reagan is perhaps more provocative.
Nancy is probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. I think if you want to talk about what her worst quality is that her perfectionism drives you right up the wall.
You reveal something that a lot of us didn't know, and that is that Mrs. Reagan had much more to do with the decision-making process than perhaps many of us gave her credit for. For example, you say she lobbied the president to soften his line on the Soviet Union, to stop calling it an evil empire, to reduce military spending, to find a diplomatic solution in Nicaragua. All of these are foreign policy decisions. This is not just a lady saying, honey, you know, button up today when you go out in the cold. Should she have this influence over foreign policy?
Well, why shouldn't she? You're talking about one of the great partnerships we'll ever see between Ronald and Nancy Reagan. There is nothing those two don't share. She gets into policy if, like other things, it appears that he's getting wrong advice, he's not getting all the advice, or it's beginning to turn in a negative way for him, and then she'll get involved in it.
What about those people who say she was not elected and she should not be discussing foreign policy and the president shouldn't be listening to her? She shouldn't have this effect.
Fine. He's the president. He was elected. Doesn't have to listen to her. But she is there. She is his partner. She is someone he trusts and loves. It's the closest relationship you're going to have. I mean, if you want to elect monks to the White House, then that's something else again.
Michael Deaver's 20 years of helping to shape the Reagan's life ended in 1985 when he left the White House to start his own public relations firm. Almost immediately, he attracted high-paying clients, and within a year was reportedly making almost $500,000. His clients included big corporations and foreign governments. And then there was a Time magazine cover story, which made Deaver seem too rich, too arrogant, too powerful, too fast. There was that picture on Time magazine, which just so happens I'm sitting on here. You may feel that's what should happen to it, I don't know. Of Mike Deaver in his limousine on his telephone with the lobbyist Michael Deaver, and inside it says, I've got as good access as anybody. A lot of people
you just made
feel
four
this is what they're
statements, three of which are incorrect,
Okay,
one of which is right. First of all, it's not my limousine. Secondly, it's not my telephone. Thirdly, I wasn't a lobbyist. But fourthly, I did say
Okay, but you do have a limousine even if this was not yours.
No, I didn't have a limousine.
You had a
Not
Jaguar.
just today.
You had a Jaguar, right then?
Right.
Okay, not bad.
Not bad
Did
at all.
your Jaguar have a telephone?
Yeah.
Okay, so even though this wasn't yours, it was pretty similar.
Okay.
It says lobbyist here, so that's Time, and you did have, where was I right? You did say you had a lot of access.
Yeah, I did say that.
Nancy Reagan called you up and said, uh-oh, when she saw this picture.
She said you made a big mistake.
For a PR guy, you sure lost sight of your own PR, didn't you?
I guess so. I guess so. I wonder if there is a PR guy in the world that could help me.
But it wasn't just bad PR. A 1978 Ethics and Government Act made it illegal for former government officials to use their connections for up to 1 year after leaving office. Government agencies began to investigate Deaver, and reporters began asking questions.
Sir, a lot of people are saying that Michael K. Deaver is making a lot of money because of his influence with you, and that that's wrong. What do you think?
Mike has never put the arm on me or sought anything or any influence or from me since he has been out of government.
When you have this kind of access, and people know that you do, and that you can pick up the telephone and call, how do you avoid the appearance of conflict of interest?
I did everything I could to avoid that. I never talked to the president about a client ever in my life. I testified in the grand jury, and later we came up in the trial about one time being up in the residence with the Reagans socially in the evening having a drink or something, and the president was started telling me about this great idea for Central America for the Caribbean Basin Initiative, which was the Twin Plant Project. And it was a concept that I had worked out after I'd left the White House in the private sector for a client. And I said, Mr. President, I can't talk to you about that. It would have been very easy in the quiet of that room with the three of us there, nobody would have ever known, to say, you're right, I hope you take that ball and run with it.
Still, a special prosecutor was appointed, and an investigation and trial followed. Deaver was not charged with violating the Ethics Act, but he was found guilty of lying when he testified and was convicted of perjury. It's hard to believe that your contacts with the people in government were not the most important thing about your PR firm.
They were a very important thing about my PR firm. But if influence peddling, if that's the term we all want to use, is a crime, there'd be an awful lot of people in this town in jail. The special prosecutor spent 8 months with 11 lawyers and God knows how many FBI agents looking at 50,000 of my documents, every telephone call, everything I did. And if there had been a scintilla of evidence that I'd broken a law under the ethics law, I can guarantee you this particular prosecutor would have taken me to court on that, but he didn't.
Do you think that the ethics in government law should be repealed? That it really is too foggy to understand where the line is drawn?
It's very hard for lawyers and judges to interpret it, what the Congress wrote. And if you're going to have an ethics in government law, then let's get everybody in. I mean, my God, you have congressmen up there now who announce they're going to resign at the end of this term, and that the job they've accepted will be, and it's in an industry that they have an oversight responsibility for the remaining part of their term. Now, that's their decision if they want to do that, but don't be hypocritical and say there's only the executive branch that needs to be watching, and within that executive branch there's only a select few that have to be treated differently than everybody else.
With all his problems, Deaver says he isn't bitter. He still lives in a quiet suburb of Washington with his wife of 19 years and his 2 children, and only recently admitted that he has won a great personal battle. Your trial brought out the, to many people, extremely surprising fact that you are an alcoholic, that you spent some time in a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. All those years you worked in the White House, the president didn't know this, Mrs. Reagan didn't know this?
No. It wasn't all those years in the White House that alcohol controlled me. It was only the last few months in the White House.
Alcoholism was used in your defense because your attorney claimed that you couldn't remember some of the events that took place.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it also have blurred or distorted your decision-making when you were in the White House?
It may have. I am not aware of those times when I made mistakes in the White House that were due to my alcoholism, but there could have been.
What do you have now? What's left?
I've got the best sense of my own worth I've ever had.
Do you have any money left?
Not much.
Do you have any offers for jobs?
Nope. I haven't been able to earn a living, so I haven't been able to do much. And I've spent a lot of time on thinking about what really is important to me in my life. And I found out that all of that power and the access that you like to talk about and the public attention and the Jaguars and all the rest of it really don't stack up against health, family, and friends.
Have you heard from the President or Mrs. Reagan since you were found guilty?
I got a note from Nancy, yes.
You're not able to talk to her at all, though, are you?
No.
You miss it?
Sure.
You once said to me that you loved the President.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still?
Yes.
Do you love Nancy Reagan?
Yes.
I guess someone can't give a greater testimony than that.
He still just has to wait to find out whether he goes free or goes to jail. Barbara, what about
Or
Deaver's...
anything in between.
Or something in between. What about his assertion that Nancy Reagan is an enormous influence on the formation of foreign policy? I know you saw Nancy recently and probably touched on that.
Well, I did see her at the White House because we're doing a story with her on breast cancer. My sense of it is that she wouldn't criticize Mike Deaver or his book because he's been through so much and she's very loyal to him. But the assertion that she is the power behind the throne and makes the foreign policy decision, I think her aides would say was very inaccurate. This is a husband and wife who talk to each other and trust each other, but she's not the alternate Secretary of State, and I'm sure that she feels that her husband, the President, does make the foreign policy decisions.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, still ahead.
If you're old enough to murder someone, are you old enough to be executed? Or should the line be drawn at a certain age? Maybe, as many of us did, you assume that we don't execute minors in this country. Well, we do. But the case of this Oklahoma teenager could change that. Only 15 when he committed a particularly gruesome murder. He's now hoping the Supreme Court will save his life. ABC News law correspondent Tim O'Brien has been following this case for years. We asked him to bring his expertise to bear on the issues and the people involved.
This is the execution chamber at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. An official death warrant orders that Wayne Thompson die here, that he be put to death by continuous intravenous administration of lethal drugs. That's the price the state of Oklahoma demands for an especially brutal murder. And there's no dispute the murder of Charles Keene was that.
He got about a this big log chain wrapped around his feet.
Keene had been dead for 3 weeks when they pulled his body from the bottom of a river near rural Chickasha, Oklahoma.
Charles Keene had his throat cut, and he'd been cut down his chest with about an 8 or 10 inch cut directly down the middle of his chest. And he was ultimately shot twice. So the cause of death was ultimately the gunshot wounds.
And then they dumped his body over here.
Well, they weighted his body first with a large log chain and a very heavy concrete block. They had him weighted down, and that's where they sunk his body.
Charles Keene died as he had lived, brutally. He had a long criminal record, drug problems, and was described in court as a bully who tormented and repeatedly beat his wife, Vicki, even after the two had divorced.
He'd just come at me, you know, and just start hitting and kicking and cussing and threatening.
How long did this go on?
About 7 years.
Vicki even considered killing Keene.
Yeah.
Thought about killing your husband?
Either me or him won.
Vicki didn't kill her husband. Her 15-year-old brother did.
You must have hated Keene very badly.
I did.
What were you thinking?
At that time, I was scared, very nervous.
Tell me more. What was the night like that night?
It's very cold. I believe there was snow and patches on the ground.
It was a night much like this one. Cold, still, black. It was January 23rd, 1983, way past midnight. Wayne Thompson and 3 of his friends muscled Keene into a car and brought him to this desolate bridge over the Washita River that runs alongside town. Keene broke away and ran to the nearest house, where the sound of gunfire woke Malcolm Brown, known around here as Possum.
About 2 or 2:30 that night, in the morning, a.m., boy knocked on my door and hollered, open the door and let me in, they're going to kill me.
Who was that?
Charles Keene. And I opened the door and come out on the porch here, and they was beating him up, whooped him, hit him. One man standing on the north side holding a gun.
Mr. and Mrs. Brown saw them pick up the man off the front porch and load him into the trunk of an automobile. He'd been severely beaten. His leg had been broken. Charles Keene couldn't run anymore. Wayne Thompson came back and told people that he'd cut his throat and he shot him in the head.
Wayne Thompson came to trial in this Chickasha courtroom 11 months after the crime. He was then 16 years old. The judge ruled he should be tried as an adult. The prosecution demanded the death penalty.
It was difficult to make a decision, very difficult. When you're dealing with another man's life, it makes it very difficult to decide
what should be done.
It was difficult, but swift. It took Thompson's jurors only part of an afternoon to find him guilty, part of the evening to set his penalty. They determined that there were aggravating circumstances in the murder, that it was an especially atrocious, heinous, or cruel crime. Wayne Thompson thus became the 32nd person now facing execution in this country for crimes committed while under the age of 18. Age has never been found to be a constitutional barrier to execution, and while putting juvenile offenders to death has become rare in the United States, it has occurred nearly 300 times in our history. Most recently, Jay Pinkerton was executed in Texas in 1986 for a murder he committed at the age of 17. The youngest person to be executed in this century is George Stinney. He was 14 when South Carolina put him to death for murder in 1944. He weighed 95 pounds. There is no national minimum age for execution. 9 states prohibit the execution of anyone under 18. But 28 other states do permit it, including Indiana and Vermont, where the law allows the execution of 10-year-olds. Oklahoma has no minimum age at all, and both the American Civil Liberties Union and Amnesty International have mobilized against Wayne Thompson's death sentence.
This young man, Wayne Thompson, would not be killed in the Soviet Union, the Republic of South Africa, Libya. The United States is the only country that kills its children.
Do we really want to think of ourselves as so medieval and so barbaric that we do not shy away from the spectacle, in effect, of hanging children? That's what the Supreme Court has to decide.
And what it does decide has the potential to change the course of history. Thompson's lawyers are asking for what would be a landmark, that it's unconstitutional to execute Thompson or anyone else who was a juvenile at the time of the offense. They cite the 8th Amendment and its protection against cruel and unusual punishment.
We contend that there are basic dominant American traditions that younger children, and Wayne Thompson was a child under the laws of Oklahoma at the time, are to be judged differently and perhaps treated less harshly than adults.
Wayne Thompson, he deserved to die like any other person that would go out and commit this kind of act. This is not a boy. This is not a juvenile or a kid, immature. He's not immature.
But at his trial, the defense argued that Wayne Thompson's youth made him particularly vulnerable, that he was driven to protect his sister against Keene's violence.
After we had been married for a period of time, I felt like it was my fault. You know.
I seen him myself beat her up. I seen her afterward, you know, black eyes, busted up face and stuff like that. And I ran in to help them and ended up getting beat up myself.
Did he ever molest you sexually?
He wasn't successful, but he tried.
The jury's decision was that neither Charles Keene's character nor Wayne Thompson's youth excused the crime.
He was a youngster, but that didn't change the crime. It didn't change anything. It was done.
Jury foreman Floyd Marshall had 2 sons at home, just about Wayne Thompson's age.
One of the messages of the death sentence is that it will deter others from doing the same thing. Did that figure into it?
I believe that teenagers are deterred by the things that could happen to them if they believe they're going to happen. If they really believe they're going to happen.
A 15-year-old doesn't consider death as happening to them. I mean, ask any 15-year-old, would they believe they was going to die if they did something? They'll tell you no.
You didn't think at all about being executed?
No.
We tell them, no, if you do this, this is going to happen to you. They go do it, and it doesn't happen.
You were arrested 9 times. How come you never cleaned up your act?
They never did nothing to me. They put me on probation when I was 11 years old, and I was arrested numerous times after that, and they still never did do nothing to me.
So you felt pretty much free to do it again, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Wayne continued and we allowed Wayne. You know, you stop and think about it. That boy may be where he's at today because of the environment that he's been brought up in of, we're not going to do anything.
What did you think when you were released after you got picked up for doing something, a burglary or for using drugs, and they let you go, did you kind of feel that you beat the system?
Yeah, I feel like I got away with it.
You felt kind of invulnerable?
I guess so. I guess
invincible?
Yeah. Wouldn't say invincible.
Indeed. Tim, the Supreme Court could rule on this in just days, couldn't it?
That's correct. They have already heard arguments on it, and there's some speculation. There was a vacancy on the court. There is some speculation that it may divide the justices right down the middle, 4-4.
4-4, with a total of 8. Now, when Justice Anthony Kennedy comes on board on the 18th of this month, whatever he had to say about it, if they redo it, would be the law of the land, wouldn't it?
Probably. Ordinarily, when they split 4-4, whatever the lower court says stands, but it's highly unlikely they'd allow Wayne Thompson to die on a 4-4 vote. They may schedule it for re-argument, and if they do, his opinion would be the 5th vote, and he would determine whether Thompson and all the other juvenile offenders on death row live or die.
Thank you, Tim.
Barbara?
It's a lot of power to have. Next, here with a report that is set.
One expert says it's one of the greatest fears in the country today. Growing old, losing your memory, being put into a nursing home. 1.5 million Americans are currently living in nursing homes, and by the year 2000, 2.5 million will be in institutional care. Tonight, we have the story of what one family went through to put Mom in a nursing home. And in this case, it's a success story with a quiet lesson on how to face up to the difficult emotions that involves. Emotions heightened by seeing someone you love very much struggling with even the simplest things in life, like putting on a record.
When I was young, I was full of life and vigor and vim. But things change slowly. You find you can't do things anymore that you used to be able to do easily. Now it is difficult to do them, or some things you can't do at all. You do start to forget things. I try to ignore it. I mean that I forget things, but I do.
Her name is Cloyd Hannes. She is 82 years old, a widow living alone in her apartment, helped by a nurse's aide. The primary responsibility to look after Mrs. Hannes had fallen on her 47-year-old son and his wife. And this is as much a story about the middle-aged children of the elderly as it is about an aging parent.
No one warned us that in our own middle age we would end up being in a sandwich.
My goodness.
Between problems with in this case one aged parent, and the typical adolescent problems that one has with teenage children.
It's been a stressful period of time, extremely stressful. David is an only child. We are really her only family, and it is up to us to make sure that she's cared for.
I can't move too fast, you know.
Right.
I might slip and fall down.
Can't have that. Now, just hang on a second. Let me get the...
Once socially active, Mrs. Hannes now rarely went out, afraid to climb the apartment steps since falling a year ago.
Wow.
Until a nurse's aide companion came to live with her, Mrs. Hannes wasn't eating a proper diet.
I made you a chicken soup today.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Goody, goody.
She would also occasionally forget to take her medication, 6 different pills that she must take 3 times each day.
For breakfast, for lunch, for dinner.
You remember how much you have for breakfast?
7.
6.
But round-the-clock care is expensive, and her late husband's pension was running out. Her days had become structureless. She spent most of her time in bed. For all these reasons, a change had to be made.
One of the options which we rejected was Mom coming to live with us. Number one, she didn't want to live with us. Number two, she didn't want to be a burden to us. And then we both realized that we really couldn't put off what we've been procrastinating any longer. And we began to think about nursing homes.
David Hannes spent 6 months driving from nursing home to nursing home, searching for the right place for his mother. But convincing her to go was much more difficult.
It took about 4 months to get her to really consider the idea that moving into a nursing facility might be a good idea for her. And I'd think, phew, okay, we got that done. And on my next visit,
She wouldn't remember
a word of it, and I would have to go back to the beginning.
What persuaded me that I had to make the move? You?
Well, we've talked about it for a long time.
Because I could have stayed here, couldn't I? But then you would have had to take care of me.
David kept a file of all the nursing homes he researched, and he brought his mother to only one, the Bethel Methodist Home in Ossining, New York, about a half-hour's drive from her apartment. It is considered an excellent multi-level care facility, and she was accepted here as a resident. Once in, she would be eligible for Medicaid when her husband's pension ran out.
The trouble is, I don't want to go, really. I want to stay here. But it's much better for David, who now handles my money and so forth. It's much better for him that I go. And now then he won't have to worry about getting me nurses' aide companions to stay with me.
I was making decisions for her the way she used to make decisions for me when I was growing up. And I suddenly realized, one day she said this direct quote, she said, "I'll do anything you want me to." And a voice in my head shouted, "No, no," because I suddenly realized that I had tremendous power over this woman, over my mother, and I didn't want it.
I don't like any part of it, and I never expected to feel like this. I thought I could stay in my own house and take care of myself forever. But my son thinks I can't. And he's pretty much taken my life and affairs and, taken over. Huh?
Mrs. Hannes, like many elderly people, without even trying to, made her son feel guilty about what he was doing. This document, it's called The Caregiver's Rights, advocates the right to be free of guilt while making these hard choices for someone else. David, though, never saw it.
And all the while, I had this kind of nagging, guilty feeling that I was really doing something that she really wasn't going to like. And there's a small part of every middle-aged adult who still wants to please their parents. And in this case, I really couldn't. I mean, because if I did what she thought would make her happy, if we did what she wanted us to do, we would have been ill-serving her. It would not have been in her best interest.
As the day of her departure approached, with just 3 days left in her apartment, Mrs. Hannes's anxiety grew even greater.
And now the time is coming. I'm supposed to be going to Bethel on Monday. And I'm getting more and more upset about it. I want to stay here. This is home. So I guess what I'm afraid of is going where I won't be at home.
It was during those final days that David took his mother for a last look at the old house where he'd grown up and from which his mother had eventually moved after his father's death.
I remember when Dad planted those trees by the front door.
Yes,
Look how big they are now.
Mrs. Hannes had left the big family house, bringing the memories with her to a small apartment. Now it was time to move again. She requested 2 things, a private room and the right to bring her own furniture and belongings. So David, using paper models of her furniture, helped decide what pieces to take.
Yeah.
Because, you've got this large apartment and you were moving to a small room.
Yes. I'm going to take this and this and this and this and that and that.
Then you have your scarves.
Then Helen Lee, her nurse's aide companion, helped reorganize Mrs. Hannes's wardrobe.
And this one now, you have your
Sweaters.
sweaters and like extra tops and your swimsuits.
Uh-huh.
Okay? So that's
I
about
wonder if I'm ever going to swim in the ocean again. Huh?
Well, who knows? Maybe.
Doesn't look that way.
Right?
Now, Miss Emmy wasn't a dressmaker. Isn't that funny?
And finally, the family pictures, the only remaining link to Mrs. Honus' past. Moving them was most important of all.
These will all be hung in your room
You're marvelous.
by this time tomorrow night, so that when you move in Monday, the whole family picture wall will be rehung.
I looked after my husband, but there's nobody to look after me. I took good care of him, I think, and I miss him dreadfully.
David Honus, with the help of his son, then moved his mother's furniture to the nursing home one day before she would make the move.
And finally, the day itself, an end and a new beginning. And Mrs. Honus was resistant to the last moment.
I hardly slept at all. I don't like packing up, and I don't like moving.
Well,
yeah.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. And oh my, I have enjoyed having you here.
No mention.
You know, I want to stay here with you.
I know.
The only good thing I can think of is that I won't have to climb those steps anymore. What a nasty day.
Gloomy.
Gloomy is right. I was hoping something might happen and I wouldn't have to go.
Well,
Except then where would I have been? Oh, this is it, to the left?
this is it. Remember?
There was definitely sadness. There was a sense of loss, a sense of grieving for something that meant a lot to you that was just not going to be there anymore. Because she created a home for us to go home to. And we're not going to be able to go to Nana's house anymore.
Welcome to Victor.
I'm exhausted.
I bet you are. Would you like to come up to your room?
Yes, I certainly
Lovely
would.
room.
Oh, well, I've got to learn how to do this, I guess. Oh, there we go. Well, well, well. How attractive. David, I don't know how you did all this. Oh, you've been busy. What can I do for you, David?
You've already done it.
Oh, my.
This is our new resident, Mrs. Cloyd Honus. These ladies all live on your floor.
Oh.
This is Mrs. Smith, Miss Spencer. This afternoon, we have a new resident with us. She's seated at table number 5, and her name is Mrs. Cloyd Honus. Welcome, Mrs. Honus.
Now, you want me to take this now? This is off schedule, but it won't matter, will it?
No, you're pretty much on schedule. We're just putting you on our schedule.
Oh, chocolate.
We're delighted to have Mrs. Hunt here. It really takes about a week to learn the logistics, where the room is, what the hours are, and so on. And then after that, there's frequently a week of sort of settling in, and that may involve a certain sadness and a realization of what's happened. After those 2 weeks are over and people begin to know staff by their first names and so on, we're usually off to a good start.
And so, after 2 weeks, we returned to check up on Mrs. Hannes.
How are you settling in here?
Well, I'm settling in. Of course, everything is done for me, but then I have to do what they want when they want it.
Of the people you've met, are there any potential future friends? Has that crossed your mind?
Yes, it has. And the only thing I can think of is to do what I would like, to find somebody who's looking for a friend, whom you can sit and talk to.
Well, perhaps you'll find it.
And I hope to find it. It's her. Hope to find her. There aren't very many men. There are a few men here, but not very many. Which is too bad, because I like men.
I never reconsidered. I never thought, well, maybe we better just let her live in her apartment, because there wasn't enough structure. We now know that she's well cared for, and that when and if the money does run out, she will continue to be well cared for.
7, 8, 9, 10.
You had 9, 10.
Yeah.
When you first think in terms of placing a parent in a nursing home, you think of it as the beginning of the end. But tonight I really felt like it was a new beginning for her.
You know, this is a new beginning, because she has made further adjustments since I visited her a few days ago, and some of the things she feared have evaporated, and so she's making a good adjustment. This is a positive. She's making friends. She's not afraid of the regimentation. It wasn't there. That's a particularly good place, and there's no way to generalize. Each case is a different one, but I think a couple of things that the son did were worth remembering. He made an exhaustive survey of the homes to be sure that he found one that was right for his mother and within the right distance for visiting and whatnot. And I think he's at peace in his own mind about it.
She did have a very good adjustment, and not everyone does quite as well, and I think if it helps at all, it's to know that so many people do feel some guilt, and that's almost natural and normal when you love someone very much. Well, next, for a couple you've met before on 2020, a gift that just today made a dream come true.
ABC's Olympic Diary is brought to you by Kellogg's. Someone once said there are 2 seasons in the Rockies. There's winter and there's rodeo. The annual Calgary Stampede is one of the biggest rodeos anywhere. And even though calf roping and bronco busting aren't official Olympic sports, rodeo events will be as much a part of the Olympic atmosphere as figure skating and downhill skiing.
In The Best Chance Yet, we told of a procedure that holds new hope for infertile couples. It's called GIFT, which stands for Gamete Intrafallopian Transfer. And what distinguishes GIFT is that, unlike other forms of artificial insemination, sperm and eggs are actually brought together inside the woman's body. This is one method of artificial insemination not forbidden by the Catholic Church. And for Wanda and Bill Nagy, the couple that we featured in our report, it was good news then.
Are you? I'm very, very pregnant. Oh, great.
And it has brought great news today. You're looking at twins that Wanda Nagy gave birth to this morning. Babies Brianne Christine Nagy and William Russell Nagy, Jr. arrived at 11:15 a.m. Eastern Time.
It's hard to believe, you know, after all those years, and now it's here. It's hard to believe.
There just I don't think are any words that can explain the feeling at this moment. It's just overwhelming, and to have these
two and a boy and a girl.
Oh yeah, that more than answered our prayers.
Congratulations to Wanda and Bill, and our best wishes for their brand new family. And now here's Ted Koppel to tell us about tonight's night.